Welcome to this seminar on managing financial stress and restructuring in higher education from Evershed's offices at 1 Wood Street in London, in the centre of the city.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for inviting me today. I think it's a very important discussion. I think what I want to do is start off and perhaps help frame some of the discussion, so think about some of the trends, some of the recent changes we've seen in the sector, and also think about the sort of policy environment that institutions are operating in, obviously to pick up on some of the points that Neil made about things that might act as shocks on the system. So I think probably to start off, it's important, whilst there have been issues in the media and there is a sort of increasing concern around institutional sustainability and particular institutions, I think we do need to remember it's been a remarkably resilient sector. We had quite significant changes introduced in 2012 with the introduction of fees, and I think I accept what you said, Neil, about the sector perhaps escaping some of the worst of austerity, but we do need to remember that the introduction of fees, what did come along with the removal of most or the majority of public funding for universities and the removal of capital funding as well, and universities had to manage that process. And we also saw at the same time the lift in the numbers cap and obviously the introduction of a more competitive market within the sector, and the sector had to adjust very quickly to both those sets of changes. And it wasn't just about how they aligned themselves to be more competitive within that market, but also shift in thinking in terms of their own business model. For example, the removal of capital funding meant they had to be thinking about how they were going to support investment in their infrastructure, in their student experience, attract borrowing or service borrowing, but also thinking about building surpluses, and they had to do that in a relatively hostile environment as well, because obviously universities started thinking about building surpluses that they could reinvest or service borrowing, but at the same time they got criticised they were awash with cash. So there was a really sort of a set of contradictory sort of messages coming about the sort of sustainability of universities and how they were developing that business model in that new environment. I think it's safe to say this environment is leading to variable financial strength across the sector, as previously Hefke in its financial forecast reporting from institutions outlined it. I think the 10 stresses that are set out in the paper that you've circulated will affect institutions in very different sort of ways. I think there are a set of common issues that were identified certainly in the last report from Hefke on the sort of financial health of the sector. One was around dependence on international students. Other one was changes in government policy. Another one was sort of the need to continue to reinvest and keep the infrastructure up to date within the context of the removed capital funding, and also obviously increased borrowing and falling liquidity within the system overall. I think a number of institutions still have quite ambitious growth plans, particularly for international students, and that was identified by Hefke. But I think also some still have quite ambitious growth forecasting for home students as well, and particularly within the context of a demographic dip. And I think that's going to present quite significant challenges as well for a number of institutions. But the one thing I wouldn't underplay out of all of that, and it's in your list, Neil, is the impact of government policy and the significance that will have. If we see a reduction in the fee, and it's not replaced by Treasury funding, as has been sort of floated in various media. Now, I don't know how true that is, and we'll have to see where the post-18 review lands. But if it was, for example, reduced to 7.5k in England, that's £1.6 billion worth of funding gone, and I think also that will reduce the institution's ability to reinvest and service borrowing and reinvest in capital. And I think also if we do see that money replaced by the Treasury, I think that money will also probably come with more strings attached to it. There will be more of a sort of public policy drive behind it. It might be focused more on high-cost subjects or particular areas where there is government interest. So there's a potential risk there. At the moment, the fee sort of supports the autonomy of institutions to make investment decisions about where they use that money, and there's a lot more pressure as well on demonstrating value for money and where that money goes. And I think we also need to think about wider government expectations as well. I was at a meeting the other day where there were people, quite senior people from across the school sector, across government, talking about how important it is for universities to set up schools. And so there's an increasing expectation for universities to do more for less. And I think that will be a challenge as well. How can we manage those expectations about setting up a school, or some institutions working with FE colleges, against their core business and managing that? And then I think obviously there's the uncertainty of Brexit, and then immigration policy as well. And I think the combination of all those changes coming together at pretty much the same time, sort of early 2019, could have really quite a significant impact on institutions. So I'll leave it there as a few sort of framing comments.
So can I thank you for joining us, and thank our online viewers, and we'd welcome comments and discussion afterwards. And please feel free to write in and tell us anything we've missed, because that'll be the next programme. So from all of us at Eversheds, with particular thank you to Glenn and his colleagues for hosting us and providing the facilities today, and from Chris and Julie and James and all the participants who've come, thank you very much, and see you soon.